Hi, I'm Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart, where we revisit the vivid memories of the food we grew up with.
I couldn't believe the tastes and the flavors.
Lydia Bastianich. Hi, Chris. Susan Sarandon.
And, of course, the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives.
You know, I've been dying to chop this up with you for a while now.
Yeah.
And I would do Julia Child. This is a lovely chocolate macadamia nut truffle that has dark chocolate. You can get it in milk chocolate, too. I prefer the dark.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alice Waters.
I was the one sort of like mommy dearest.
He'd order one side of the menu and eat that. And then when he was finished eating that, he'd order the other side of the menu and eat all of that. He emptied the kitchen.
Food is the thing. Come on. We know that. Campaign.
My guest today is author Dorie Greenspan. Called a culinary guru by the New York Times and the writer of 15 cookbooks, Dorie Greenspan is an American author who has won the James Beard Foundation Award 5 times and has twice won the International Association of Culinary Professionals Cookbook of the Year Award, as well as having been given that organization's Lifetime Achievement Award. She's also been given the Order of Agricultural Merit by the French government and has been listed on the James Beard Foundation's Who's Who of Food and Beverage in America. Dorie has been on the New York Times bestseller list 3 times and has been a columnist for the Washington Post and more recently the New York Times Magazine. Her newest cookbook, Dorie's Anytime Cakes, will be published on October 21st, 2025. She currently writes the XOXO Dorie newsletter on Substack and lives in 3 places: New York City, Connecticut, and she joins us today from her 3rd home in the City of Lights, Paris, France. Dorie Greenspan, welcome to Cooking by Heart.
Oh, thank you. I'm listening to you. I feel like I should be, I'm short. I just pushed my seat up high. I feel like I should be so much taller. Who is that person?
She is in the pantheon, ladies and gentlemen, of any number of places and organizations, and deservedly so.
Oh, thank you.
I must bring this up. I met Dorie at a mutual friend's apartment in New York City on New Year's Eve, and she and I ended up serving dessert together.
Yes.
Cutting an apple pie and several other desserts that were sort of sitting around, and it was a delight.
You did the cutting. You were a very good cutter. I never cut. If I weren't married,
really?
Everybody. Yeah, I love baking and I love
Yeah.
Once it's out there, I don't cut. I cannot cut a straight piece of cake.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought it was because it ruined the perfection of your creation or something.
Oh, no.
No, not that.
That was just a flaw in my abilities.
Hardly. Probably one of very few. I want to get to the crux of things here and talk about what we've always talked about to begin with, which is provenance, where we're from, because it has so much to do with the food we eat and how we grew up, obviously. So, Brooklyn? Describe your family, can you? Your mom, your dad?
Actually, we lived in several places. My mother used to tease and say, as soon as anything needed to be painted, my father would move. And one day she came home and my father and my uncle were sitting in the dark. And she walked in and my father said, we have to move. The fuse had blown. So I've lived in several houses in Brooklyn and for a very brief time on Long Island. Yeah.
Just that image of the people sitting in the dark gives the term Luddite new meaning.
And that was, and I can't even imagine thinking about my father now with the possibility of, computers and.
Oh, yeah.
No.
I've had this conversation with any number of people who are closer to my age and yours
Yes.
about the difference in the way we grew up as opposed to the way children are growing up now. I have 9 grandchildren, and they are far more expert at 4 and 5 and 6 years old than I am at manipulating everything. And the explanation we came up with was that we grew up with linear brains, not digital ones. The wiring is different.
As you were saying that, I was thinking, I wonder if we get like pats on the back for being the age we are and doing what we're doing right now, even, that maybe this has made us more flexible than we would have been otherwise.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah, more resilient, more ready, more open to innovation. I hope
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I'm going to get back to Mom and Dad. Who did the cooking?
No one.
Oh, what?
That's not really true. So Mom, Dad, 2 younger brothers. I was the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
My father had, I once called it a grocery store, and my mother told me it was a supermarket. And I think it was. But my father was in the food business, really.
Oh.
My mother loved food, but just didn't want to be the one to cook it, and never did.
Interesting.
We had babysitters and housekeepers who cooked.
Mm-hmm.
And I only recently, because I've actually been kind of working at this, I've been able to think of some dishes that my mother actually cooked, that she put her hands to and made.
Right.
Baked apple.
Oh, yeah.
And she made sandwiches.
Mm.
Yeah, I haven't come up with anything else yet. Later, I think even after my father died, she may have made a pot roast.
Mm.
Didn't cook, but just loved food and loved going out. My mother loved going out to eat. And she grabbed me, just like on a Saturday afternoon, she'd say, let's go. And she'd get in the car. But she didn't have any interest in cooking at all. Loved to shop for food.
Mm-hmm.
I can see her grocery lists. They were done by the aisle, because of course she knew the store really well.
Yeah, right. It was the family store.
Right. So by aisle, she went to the bakery every day and got fresh bread. There was always bakery cake. She just didn't cook. Meals were very simple.
So did she follow instructions from the people who did cook as to what ingredients they needed to cook?
Yeah, she would ask, what do you need? And she would buy it.
Huh.
I really have never figured it out. She worked. She loved to work.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. So she was very entrepreneurial. She started businesses. She loved being out among people. I think she was grateful that this was one job that she didn't have to do.
Mm. And it's interesting, I've talked to any number of people whose parents were of your parents' generation, who talk about their mothers as either being a working mother or very frustrated because they were very smart and tied down at home. And so the food ultimately at home was, I don't want to call it, it's hard to describe. My friend Michael Patrick King, who did one of my first podcasts, described the only time there was any flavor in the food at home was when his mother cried in the mashed potatoes. That she was so desperately unhappy because she was very smart and felt completely tied down by family responsibilities when she wanted to be out in the world.
I've always thought my mother was really lucky that she was able to go to work because I knew she loved it.
Yeah.
Maybe she would have cried into the mashed potatoes. But so food was really very simple. We always had 3 courses. We always had a starter. I can remember my father, because he loved it, having a half a grapefruit to start.
Yes. Right? Yeah.
Nobody does that anymore.
No, this was ubiquitous back when I was growing up.
And we had a set of grapefruit spoons.
Yes.
Do you remember those?
Yes, the serrated edge. Yeah.
I bet you couldn't find those. No, maybe they're in a flea market here.
Yeah.
So there was something to start, sometimes a salad. There was a main course that had vegetables and and once a week we had fish, and my mother would then insist that in addition to fish, we had to have something like fruit and sour cream, because somehow fish didn't count as healthy or protein full or able to build strong bodies in 12 ways. I mean, fish was, I don't know why she felt it had to be served, but we had to have fish once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had dessert.
So the main courses were mostly what? Meat?
Yeah, so I can remember lamb chops, which I don't love now, but my mother claimed I loved them and would only eat them for 1 year. I don't know. It would be meat, it would be a baked potato, there would be vegetables frozen and, boiled, but there would be a real meal with fresh bread.
Right. Is that your earliest food memory?
Can't come up with an earliest food memory.
Okay.
No, I have nice childhood memories of, and it had to be early because I'm thinking of where we were living at the time, of my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
She knew her daughter well. She would come and bring food. So she would not just, I waited for the apple cake and the cookies, but she also brought soup and a vegetable and a whole chicken. And I don't know how she ever,
She schlepped it up to wherever you lived? Yeah. Or out to Brooklyn, rather.
It was in Brooklyn, and things you don't think about as a kid. The cookies came in a shoebox. Did my grandmother buy shoes every week so she had a box for them?
A fresh shoebox.
The packages were heavy. How did she carry them? And I'm imagining, those lines that you get on your hand if you carry a shopping bag for too long.
Yeah.
She must have loved us. When I think of my grandmother bringing food, I think those are probably my happiest childhood food memories.
Yeah. Understandably. What was it like around the dinner table? Because obviously you had a constant sort of stream of every night with appetizer and main course and salad, et cetera, desserts. There was a lot of time around the dinner table with the family. What was the conversation like?
We talked about what we did at school, and we did always eat together.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I know we talked.
It was not necessarily that there were, I've talked to people who have said that they had fathers who questioned them at dinner or political conversations. It was a just kind of general hubbub of food and chatter.
If my father said 3 words during dinner. Right. So he was quiet. My mother was great at conversations. My brothers wanted out of there right away.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember it being unpleasant, but I don't have a memory of it as, that wonderful time when we would all, Yeah.
Although I've talked to people where it wasn't such a wonderful time. The conversation was sometimes, acerbic and difficult, and, that's when they work things out psychologically, which is not a great idea over food.
This is really what you know, that because food does bring up so many memories, does remind us of attachments, or, that maybe that's not such a bad place to work things out. I don't know. I'm glad I didn't have to.
Yes. My dad owned a restaurant. And so at the dinner table, the talk was about food. And it was brief and sometimes difficult because my dad was, he was very exacting. My mom was much younger than he and learned from him actually how to cook.
Okay.
And so his comments were often kind of acerbic and, it was not a pleasant kind of atmosphere sometimes. But that's beside the point, because my next question is, did you ever cook with anybody in the kitchen? Were you ever exposed to cooking early?
No. The kitchen got used for sure. So I must have seen stuff going on. I was completely uninterested.
Interesting.
Didn't interest me. I burned my parents' kitchen pretty much down.
What?
When I was 12.
Oh, that's a story I have to hear.
My parents were out. It was a Saturday night. My brothers were upstairs with a babysitter. I was out with two friends. We were in seventh grade, I guess. So 12, 13, 12, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just kind of, as kids do, walking up and down the street and talking. And one of them said, "Aren't you hungry? Let's make something." And I thought, French fries, we'll make French fries.
Oh, boy.
Right. So, but of course, I'd never seen anybody make French fries, but I knew we had them in a box in the freezer where we had everything and all kinds of food in boxes.
Yeah.
You put three smart kids in a room and you come up with an IQ of about 0. I didn't, neither of us, none of us did. We didn't read the box. I put a pot of oil up to boil.
Mm-hmm.
I put a lid on the pot because the only thing I knew, look at your face, the only thing I knew from science class was that water boiled faster if you covered it. So
yes,
water,
right.
oil, right?
But you didn't get past the point where they also say, don't put a lid on oil, right?
Never, no, that must have been like the following day's lifted the lid. A fire. I mean, really, but mesmerizingly beautiful. So I was both frightened and hypnotized by this. I don't know how we put it out. I'd like to think we just put the lid back on and turn the heat off.
Mm-hmm.
My friends left quickly.
Right.
And when my parents came home, they found my brothers and me sitting on the stoop with the babysitter and the firemen behind us.
Oh, what a great picture.
Oh, I mean, now that I'm, 103, I think, what would that have been like? My poor parents, coming home and seeing this. And did I mention that the kitchen had just been redone?
Oh, no.
Right. That was like my first experience. And I didn't go back into the kitchen again.
I just have this image of your father turning to your mother and saying, "Let's move." Time to move.
He may have said that. I wasn't there for it, but yeah, he might have said that. Yeah. That was the beginning and end of my cooking career until I got married. But I got married when I was 19, so there wasn't that long a time.
Let's get into that because that's interesting. First of all, I'm thinking just in terms of the demographic of my listeners and my viewers that while there are some people who are older, we have a sort of very broad spectrum of ages represented in my audience. And I'm sure that a lot of people don't really remember marrying early who are in the kind of, generation or two before us. I was married when I was 23, 24, which was not unusual at the time.
It might not have been unusual, but it wasn't anything that made my parents happy.
Because why?
Because they really felt that I was too young. I was a junior in college, and you're right that it was more common then, but I was the first of my friends to get, my friends didn't get, now, of course, 19, it's a baby.
Yeah.
And just got lucky because I married a good guy and we're still married.
Still married. That's extraordinary.
Still married. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was 19. And so I was living at home.
So how did you meet?
We met. So when I was a senior in high school, I got the job that everyone in senior class wanted. Mm-hmm. I got to work at Harnick's, what was it called? Harnick's Card and Music Shop. Hallmark cards. There was a time when it would be like a lending library, a rental library. So there was a rental library, and there were records, vinyls, and 45. Oh. And Michael came into the store, and school supplies. And so Michael came into the store while I know exactly what I was wearing because my mother had a clothing shop and she had just bought this outfit for the shop and I was wearing it.
A walking ad.
Straight skirt, black and white houndstooth, white top, turned up collar, scarf. Actually, I don't look much. I didn't look much,
Much different.
Changed
Right.
all that much. And he needed some fasteners or something for his school report.
Mm.
And that's how we met. But it was not love at first sight. It took us another 4 years to kind of figure it out.
Cinch the deal.
Yeah, to figure it out. But yes,
Yeah.
not only was I the first person in my friend group to get married, because I was living at home and my friends we were going to Brooklyn College. I was the first person to get out and have an apartment.
While you were in school?
No, when I got married.
Ah.
Yeah, because it was 1967. It was just that cusp year, before the Columbia, what was called, the Columbia student uprising.
The riots, or whatever you want to call them. Yeah.
Before things really changed. I mean, had we not gotten married, I was going to say, who knows? And I was thinking, maybe I never would have cooked. I don't know.
Yeah. So that's what led into
cooking.
The interest in cooking, because obviously before this, you didn't care. Right.
And I didn't care.
Right.
But when we got married, I wanted to cook. I was so excited about cooking. I wanted to have, so Michael's mother also, she did cook. Then when she was working, she didn't cook, but she had a dinner at her house every Friday night that I loved. She and my father-in-law would come home from work and people would start coming and filling the table. And by dessert, there would be 2 rounds of seats around the table. And I had never had an experience like this. The way you said everybody at your table talked about food, everybody at this table talked about food. They were friends from years and years and years ago. They were family. And they'd say, do you remember when Mama made that roll that when you pulled it, the dough just kind of stretched? Oh, do you remember when we used to go have, and I had never had the experience of being at a table where people were so happy talking to one another, where the conversation was nonstop, and where the food was really appreciated.
Yeah.
And when we got married, that was the picture I had in my mind. I was going to learn to cook so that we could have friends be around the table.
Yeah. Oh, that makes such perfect sense.
That was the term.
I read a little story that you told about around a recipe of rugala.
Yeah.
Where you talk about that experience of seeing somebody created. Who was the person?
So it was my mother-in-law.
That was the mother-in-law. Okay.
Because she was working, she wasn't cooking all the time. But I guess we didn't have the term then, and I wouldn't have thought about it. But she was a project baker. She would say, today I will make rugala. Once, shortly after we were married, we went to see her. It was kind of late at night, and she was making knishes. Something it never occurred to me anyone could make but professionals, right? Or a machine.
Right. Can you describe what a knish is to the general audience?
I don't even think you can find a knish now.
I haven't seen them in a long time.
Right.
Yeah.
So knish is like a dumpling, like a big dumpling. So it's got a dough that you roll out, and then you cut it into a square, and you put a dollop of usually it's mashed potatoes, very high, if they're good, really seasoned with other than tears, or maybe kasha, which are buckwheat groats,
right,
or cabbage, right? And then it gets folded up and baked. So it's like a dumpling. It's like a Chinese bun. And she was making knishes. I thought, if she had walked on water, it would have been the same for me. And I said, how do you do it? She said, it's so easy. She handed me, I still have it, an index card that was part of her little, file folder, her little card box of recipes.
Yeah.
All fingerprinted. And, essentially it's like, flour, water, oil. She said, now here's the thing. Touch the dough. This is what it should feel like. If it doesn't feel like this, add more. If it's too dry, add more oil. If it's too wet, add more flour.
Mm-hmm.
I went home.
It's not about a recipe. It's not about quantity. It's about feel.
The feel of it, knowing it.
Yeah.
And so we went home. Our kitchen, we lived in Brooklyn Heights in a small apartment in a brownstone. And our kitchen, I guess, had been a closet. And Michael had built a pull-out shelf for me. And so I started on the shelf. It must have been like 10 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, no, this doesn't feel, no, it doesn't, no. It was like, Disney's The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Yes.
That was it.
Eureka!
Well, the dough kept growing because, it needs more flour. Oh, no, more oil. I failed.
Huh. But you learn from failure.
You always learn from failure.
Yeah. You talk about it in your cookbooks.
Yeah.
How you have to keep going.
You have to keep going. Fortunately, more so with baking than with cooking, failures usually taste okay.
Yeah.
But it's the only way. And, I think about my mother-in-law saying to me, it has to feel like this. It's a wonderful feeling when you know something that well. And if you keep cooking and if you keep baking, you get to that knowledge where you can feel it. And that's a really good, that's nice.
In this book that I'm standing next to or sitting next to, you say, in cooking, I'm a mixer and matcher, a play-arounder, a snacker, a nibbler, a picnicker. That one of the ingredients that you prize in your cooking is not only the fun of cooking, but also the fact that you can, fool around and you can try things.
Yeah.
Even with recipes. Even with specific recipes that you have written out. And you encourage this.
Oh, I think so. I think, it took me a long time, obviously, to get here, but I really I'm so happy when I'm in the kitchen. And it's this kind of joy of being able to make something with my hands, which we don't have all that many opportunities to do these days in life.
Yes, right. Well, in life we don't. To see results based on something that we are doing with our hands, and it's an immediate gratification, both the olfactory and chewing and also the making of it.
Exactly. I mean, from start to finish, we can do this. And also with food, we all, we can share it with people. And so I don't want people hung up on, I don't have this fancy salt, or I don't have a chocolate that's exactly like that. Or I want people to understand that you can play around with a recipe. Baking is a formula. You have to have the...
Well, yeah.
But aside from that, if you don't like cinnamon, don't use it. If you want to use a pear instead of an apple, go ahead. If you don't want any fruit, that's okay too. And you get really comfortable with a recipe and you can make things that you're going to like.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so important.
Yeah. Of all things to think about at the moment, the joy of cooking.
Yeah.
Which was a foundational cookbook back when I started cooking.
Right.
For myself, anyway. It was the one that I went to and went, oh, okay, this is how you do that. But at the same time, the title evoked a certain kind of approach to it as well.
I never thought of the Joy of Cooking cookbook, which I still have, and
So do I.
There's a revision that came out maybe about 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right, yeah.
That really updated it, and it's a very, very good book.
Yeah.
But maybe because I grew up with my mother, cooking never seemed like a joy. So Joy of Cooking, you know how there are expressions you hear and you just repeat them as they are, like Joy of Cooking, Joy of Cooking.
Yeah.
To me, it was just a title. And now as you're saying that, of course they thought about it and meant it. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. It just occurred to me as well. So we're both kind of,
right there.
Spark there. But I want to get back to that time when you're just kind of discovering the joy of cooking.
Yeah.
And also you start thinking about using it. You were on another path.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You were studying gerontology?
I was.
Where did that come from?
I was working at a social research center. I was a grant writer and researcher. And gerontology was new then. While I was working on these studies, the National Administration on Aging first started. And I was working on a study and was really interested in that. And Columbia University had just started a master's degree in gerontology. And so I did it. I went through it. I did everything but my dissertation.
Forgive me for interrupting. I just want to make sure that our audience knows
Study of aging.
Study of aging. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So continue. Yep.
Am I sorry I don't know more about it now? Yeah.
Right.
I was doing my dissertation and thought, I thought I was going to teach. I thought I was going to be an academic. This isn't really what I want to do. And Michael said, really, all you want to do is bake. So why did you do that?
I can see why the marriage has lasted this long.
I'm very, very lucky.
Yeah.
He knows what I want or should be doing kind of before, and has a way of encouraging me to do it. Because, at that time, I was baking at home all the time. I was working, coming home and baking, going to school, coming home and baking. And I had a kid. And there were no women in the kitchen because I wanted a job. I wanted to be trained by someone. But no.
From whence came the urge to also write about it?
I was going to be very flip and say failure because I really thought I wanted to be in a kitchen. And I had a friend who knew everyone in the world, and she loved me and I loved her. And so she was introducing me to people. So-and-so will get you a job. So-and-so. She introduced me to Mimi Sheraton, who was at that time just taking a break as the New York Times restaurant critic. And I spoke to Mimi Sheraton and she said, why do you want to bake? And I said, I love baking so much. I love the creativity of it. I love working with my hands. And I would love to be in an environment where other people were interested in this and I could talk to people about what I really love. And she said to me, she was so fabulous. She said, baking is not group therapy. But she got me my first job.
As?
One of two jobs that I had as an apprentice baker at the Soho Charcuterie, which was a very chic place at the time. I had two jobs. I made the chocolate cookies, 100 of them, first thing in the morning. And then I made this chocolate cake. And as I'm saying this to you, I'm realizing this is probably where my need to play around with food came from, or it was always there. But I got bored. I got restless. I was making the same thing over and over again. And so I changed the cake. It was a cake that had whiskey-soaked raisins and I think walnuts. And I changed the cake to pecans and Armagnac-soaked prunes. And I didn't tell anyone. Just sent the cake up to the dining room. And at the end of the day, the owner of the restaurant said, that was some cake you made today. And I said, did you like it? And she said, like has nothing to do with it. That was our signature cake that you changed. You're fired.
Oy.
Fired.
Wow.
I was fired. Now I'm quite proud of it, but I was fired for creative insubordination.
That's a great phrase.
Isn't that great?
Remember that. Yeah.
So, and then I went to work at another bakery and realized that I can't do the same thing over and over again. And that same friend that helped me get my first job, she also got me my second because we were wheeling our kids down Amsterdam Avenue in strollers. And there was a sign outside of Sarah Beth's bakery. Said, experienced baker needed. And she said, go in there, get that job. I said, I have no experience. I worked for a month and got fired. And she pushed her kid's stroller into my hands and said, I'll be right back. And she came, she said, you start tomorrow morning. She was
Wow.
fabulous.
Wow.
Yeah, but when I left there, she said, okay, I think you should write about food. She said, you know how to write. You love food. Let's, that's what you could do.
And also, at the time, and lest we sound, like ancient sages remembering ancient history, there were few women who were either writing about food or in the great chefs. It was a very, very, very masculine kind of world. Yes?
Very.
Ironically.
And it was a very masculine world. And also, when I wrote my first story, so it was for Food and Wine magazine, they said, gee, it's so unusual to find someone who both writes and makes recipes. That kind of shocked me because, there weren't as many food magazines as there are now.
Right.
Cookbooks weren't as popular as they were, but I just thought if you made food and you wanted to write about it, you had to do both.
You have to do it.
Yeah. But that was unusual as well. But there was one woman chef, Leslie Revson. She was the chef at the Waldorf Astoria, and she was the woman chef in New York City at the time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot has changed, thank you.
A lot has changed, yes. Now, at the time, were there any women writers writing about food other than Mimi Sheridan? There was, who? MFK Fisher?
You had the greats. You had Julia Child was writing, MFK Fisher.
Julia Child, right.
Marcella Hazan, maybe later, in the 80s was Marcella, I think.
Your first writing job was?
Magazines.
And at some point you were working for Elle magazine, because one of the things that comes up as I look through your is the fact that you've collaborated with a few people along the way, a couple of people.
Yeah.
And that one of those collaborations came out of the fact that you were working at Elle and you were interviewing this person. What can you explain?
I've done 3 collaborations. Fabulous. Just amazing experiences. So I wrote the book Baking with Julia that accompanied Julia Child's baking series.
Right.
So I got to be with Julia and a friend of Julia's forever after, which was pretty fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote 2 cookbooks with Pierre Hermé, who is a French pastry chef. And yesterday, I went to the post office down the street here in Paris, and I bought a sheet of stamps of Pierre Hermé's most famous pastry. People care about pastry here. So there's actually, that's pretty fabulous.
Yeah.
And I wrote a cookbook with Danielle Boulud, also a French chef. But I met Danielle, when I was working for Elle. We were doing a photo shoot, and he was one of the chefs, and I got to work with him on his recipe, and we developed a relationship.
Right. Also with Jean-Georges.
Jean-Georges, I went to his first restaurant and fell madly in love with his food. And Tony Fortuna, who was the maitre d' at the time, I was a stringer for a magazine that lasted 1 issue. And in that issue, I got to write about Jean-Georges. And so I asked the maitre d' if I could talk to him, and that became a relationship.
There's so much that I want to talk to you about. One of the things that also strikes me is in your biography, you talk about the fact that you live in 3 places.
Yeah.
New York City, which is, your home in terms of, your birth home.
Right. Yeah.
Connecticut, which I'm assuming you discovered along the way.
Exactly.
Right. And then Paris. How does your cooking change? Because I know you love to cook at home. You love to have people over.
Yes.
You love to cook for people. How does it change from place to place? And not just in terms of the ingredients that are available.
But it is in terms of the ingredients, and not so much the ingredients, of course.
Yeah.
It's the way you get the ingredients and where they come from. So for me, cooking in Paris is the most fun because There are daily outdoor markets.
Yep.
Right. So you've got a different market every day. There are two that are within really easy walking distance of our apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So I get to shop there. There's a covered market where I know the fishmonger, where I know the butcher, where the cheesemonger is. She's like the mayor of our arrondissement.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a spur of the moment cooker. So if I see something, I'll just change the menu because that's delicious.
What's available informs what you're cooking.
And also it could just be a conversation that I have. So I had made short ribs. We were going to be 8 for dinner. I had made short ribs. They were all made. They were sitting out on the balcony so I could scrape the fat off the top, like getting cold.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the market and I was talking to, can you believe that Twiggy is the name of our cheesemonger? I was talking to Twiggy and she was talking about an hachis parmentier, essentially a shepherd's pie or a cottage pie that she recently had. And in just talking to her, I was so like, that's what I wanted.
Got to make it.
I came home and changed everything and served hachis parmentier for dinner. So it's kind of like that. Here more than New York or in Connecticut, I shop at, the Big Y. So it's the interaction around the food and yes, the ingredients.
You talked about your New York habitat, which is Upper West Side, which is a lot of where I lived when I've lived in New York. And there certainly are purveyors all around that part of town. But not the same in the sense of what?
And not as many as there used to be.
Oh.
Not even as many supermarkets as there used to be.
That's true. Yeah.
It's changing. And so to find I guess you would say there are mom and pop shops here.
Mm-hmm.
To find a butcher who's working with his son.
Yes.
Because there's something really nice about that.
Yeah.
Watching them work is like watching an artist. I mean, they're just masters of what they do.
Right.
On Sunday, our regular bakery is closed for bread. But there are 3 others that we can go to. People say it's changing, and it is, but it's still kind of marvelous.
And the variety of what you're interested in cooking is not just limited to baking, because you started in baking, but then you expanded your palate, so to speak, along the way. You talk about cooking as being a very generous act, particularly baking. What do you mean?
I don't know anyone, and I'm sure there are people, but who bakes for themselves.
Mm.
You would cook a meal for yourself, but when you bake, I think you have in mind the idea of sharing. And so I do think of baking as something that you share with people,
yes.
that generous with. I think it's a slight difference. Also, you don't have to bake.
Mm.
You have to cook.
Yes, that's true.
I'm not sure my mother. But baking is a choice you make. Baking is something you do, I think, because you love doing it.
Yes. And you have created any number of baking cookbooks.
Yes.
More are about baking than about the...
Yeah. I do love it. I find there's just the act of it once you do it. And I think it's, again, a little bit more truer of baking than of cooking.
Mm-hmm.
Baking requires a level of attention and focus.
There's more exactitude. It's much more specific in terms of ingredients and the result.
I think you have to pay attention more deeply than, this is probably a gross generalization, but then with cooking. And for that reason, I find it so relaxing.
Mm.
Because you're not paying attention to anything else around you. You're just baking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you talk about the favorite kind of food that you love to cook that is when you're cooking for people, is elbows on the table cooking. What do you mean by that?
I mean casual. I mean the kind of food that will encourage conversation, because you don't have to, I want everyone to enjoy the food, of course, but you don't have to pay attention to it. You don't have to fold the lettuce leaf precisely to get it on your fork.
Mm-hmm.
You can just enjoy the food and enjoy the people around you. So it's not fussy in any way. And you can, if you come to eat at my house, you please can put your elbows on the table and just be relaxed.
Interestingly to me, that's a development over time that hopefully we are all getting to, which is a period just prior to this when cooking was such an event and people were just getting into, oh yeah, now I want to learn how to cook. I want to be a gourmet cook. That things were very pristine and exact, and
yes.
They have to be served in a certain way, and the knives and the forks have to be in a certain place. And it takes the fun out of it, in a way. I mean, it's great, and it's wonderful that period existed, but...
I'm with you. So I just finished reading, the book that's coming out in October, Anytime Cakes. So I just finished reading the proof yesterday, actually. I talk about how I once made a wedding cake. I made a cake that had buttercream flowers in a cascade once. I made a Darth Vader cake once, right? That was Joshua's 4th birthday. May the 4s be with you. Yeah.
Love it.
But I'll make a loaf cake a couple of times a week. I'll make a bun cake. I'll make, a simple cake that you can have anytime. And in a way, that evolution to the simplest kind of baking is what you're talking about with food, too, that we moved away from the 78 buttercream roses on a Tuesday night.
Yes, God forbid. All right. Well, something that I do want to ask you that I ask everyone, and you sort of touched on it in the beginning. If you are experiencing something now in a culinary way, if you're sitting in a restaurant and you're having a meal or you're cooking something, and whatever you are experiencing, be it the smell, the taste, takes you back, what would that moment be in your childhood, do you think?
It would be my grandmother. I just made a honey cake that I think is like hers. I've made cookies that I think come close to hers. I'm still chasing her apple cake. And so there are things that I will taste that will bring me back.
Not necessarily an apple cake, but something that just elicits that memory. Yeah.
So my father would always have, we never ate it as a kid. It was just for my father, and I was so not interested that I never tasted it. My father would have a bowl of cornmeal mush, like polenta. It was called mamaliga. It's a dish that comes from Romania, and it's just like polenta. And I was just looking at a wonderful cookbook called Danube, and it's the food from along the Danube River. And the first recipe in the book is for mamaliga. And the author says that in Romania, if there's not cornmeal, then there's not a meal. And I never asked my father about that dish. I thought I knew the name because I thought it was funny sounding. And so I remembered it. But I never talked to him about it. I never tasted it. And reading that and seeing that recipe, and of course I made it immediately, brought back a whole flood of childhood that I hadn't really thought about. And of course, the regret of not talking to my father about it.
That's the one. That's one that I have as well. There's a lot that I know about my dad, but there's so much that I don't, and that I meant to ask him, including a time that he spent in Romania when he was a boy. He was shipped off. He was a Greek born in Asia Minor in a Greek village, and was shipped off when he was 12 years old to work in a bakery in Romania with his father's cousin, because they couldn't afford to keep all the kids at home.
Sure, yeah.
And so they all went to work in a bakery from the time they were 12 until my dad left in his early 20s. Interesting. At any rate, I'm just going to show it on screen. This wonderful cookbook that I picked up of Dorie's, most recent until, by the way, don't forget, Dorie's Anytime Cakes, which comes out October 21st of this year. And this is a delightful cookbook, by the way, and friendly and fun. We got to use that word, Dorie.
Thank you.
I want to thank Dorie Greenspan for joining me on Cooking by Heart. This has been a delightful, delightful time.
This was so nice. I'm so glad that we got to cut cake together and then do this.
Yeah, me too. All right. Dorie Greenspan, thank you.
Thank you.